And I think we're going to go ahead and get moving. So at this training event tonight, you'll get to learn how to navigate the legislative process at several different levels of government. So that's state and local and federal. We'll talk about major walking and bicycling priorities for our region. And we'll talk about ways to lend your voices, because it's really, we have a big metro area, and it's going to take all of us. It takes a village to raise a child, and I suppose build sidewalks too. So this is the first in a quarterly series. The next one is going to be May 19th. Is that right, Michael? I think that's right. May 19th, yes, is going to be Advocacy 102, and then we'll have Advocacy 103 and Advocacy 104. So if you like, continue with this series, and we're just going to keep building on the skills and the strategies that we learned tonight. And without any further ado, may I introduce Michael Kelly, our Bike Walk KC's Director of Policy and Advocacy.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day for a rescheduled meeting tonight. I'm going to share my screen here really quick. Let me share here. Can I get a thumbs up from someone in the audience? Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we can go on ahead and, hi Nora, get this show on the road. So we're going to be talking about the basics of speaking up, Advocacy Training 101, speaking up specifically for better walking and biking. Again, my name is Michael Kelly. I am the Policy Director for Bike Walk KC. My pronouns are he, him, his. And really quickly, the mission of Bike Walk KC is to redefine our streets as places for people to build a culture of active living. And so in this presentation, we are very much talking about the bare bones aspects of what does it mean to get involved in advocacy. So as you can see here, we're going to be talking about four key aspects. What is advocacy? Looking at each level of policy as it relates to advocacy, major issues that are currently taking place, and finally, how you, the advocate, can get involved. So the first thing that we want to talk about is, what is advocacy? And the simple answer is, it's about speaking up for change. So advocacy is defined as public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. We're all here because on some level, we believe that the issue of multimodal transportation and policies concerning the built environment are important and warrant our support in public spaces. But why is advocacy important? Advocacy is important because it can help to tip the scales in support or opposition of a proposed policy, plan, or project. For Bike Walk KC, we believe advocacy is important because it supports our overall mission to build a culture of active living in the region. How long does advocacy take? Advocacy is all about the long game. In the short term, we advocate for walking and biking because we don't want people to be injured or killed on our streets. In the medium term, we advocate for policies to make key changes and improvements to the built environment. And in the long term, we are pushing for a community where everyone has greater mobility choice and can feel safe, regardless of their preferred mode of transportation. And finally, the question to ask is, how can advocacy be effective? Advocacy is a team sport. The only way it can be effective is when people work together, have a clear and consistent unifying message, and push towards a definitive goal. So this selfie here is from the day that the City Council voted on the KC Tenants Bill of Rights. In addition to tenants, landlords, and housing advocates, Bike Walk KC showed up because of the close alignment of transportation and housing. Regardless of how you feel about the group, the KC tenants are a very good example of advocacy in action here in KCMO, in particular because of their work around policies like this. The Tenant Bill of Rights was ultimately adopted by the City Council. So With that basic idea of advocacy in mind, let's shift gears and look at each level and understand who controls the policy levers for active transportation. So there are a number of policymakers at each level who influence what happens with both transportation policy and spending. Let's begin with the primary actors in this realm on the federal level. The president is charged with signing and enforcing transportation policies and budget priorities set by Congress. He also appoints leadership to cabinet agencies that deal with transportation. While he can do some things through executive action, this typically doesn't extend directly to active transportation. Congress is responsible for the purse strings and crafting of legislation. They are the ones who craft the annual budget and draft prospective legislation for the president to sign or veto. There are 100 senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives, including this guy here. Each state has 2 senators, but the number of representatives varies based on population. Kansas currently has 4 House reps, while Missouri has 8. In consideration of transportation policy, a simple majority is needed to pass legislation out of the House. Things are a little bit more complicated in the Senate, but most legislation needs a 60-40 majority to pass. Much of the work on bike ped policy originates with the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure in the House and the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation in the Senate. Finally, with federal agencies. The overarching agency that carries out transportation policy is the U.S. Department of Transportation. They oversee the work of agencies under its umbrella that deal with various elements of biking, walking, and transit. And the main ones to keep in mind are the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Bonus points if you know who the current Secretary of the Department of Transportation is. So, there's also plenty that happens at the state level as well that influences what happens in Kansas City. The key policymakers at the state level are as follows, and I want to note that this list is very similar to how things work on the Kansas side as well. So with the governor signs off on policy and budget decisions made by the legislature. They can veto items, but the legislature can override that veto with a 2/3 vote in both chambers of the legislature. The governor also appoints many of the individuals who serve in leadership roles with state agencies that deal with elements of transportation, including MoDOT, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. With the state legislature, it's divided into 2 chambers, the House and the Senate. The House is made up of 163 members, and the Senate is made up of 34 members. They create and vote on legislation and funding issues related to, among other things, transportation. In addition to knowing who your representative and senator are, it may also be helpful to know which committees they serve on. For the vast majority of legislation, a simple majority is needed to get things adopted in each chamber. The Missouri Department of Transportation is the chief agency responsible for handling elements of the state's transportation system. A major component of their work falls on highways, but given that there are a number of those that run into residential and commercial areas here in KCMO, such as Bruce R. Watkins Drive, for example, there are places where they directly influence elements of the built environment for cyclists and pedestrians. Additionally, there is the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, which plays a big role in the development and maintenance of many of the trails that run into and around our region. That means they will be key players in work around both the KD Trail and the Rock Island Trail. Finally, I wanted to highlight the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. This department supports active transportation through funding opportunities which encourage physical activity. Often in conjunction with federal Centers for Disease Control, they use available funds to help communities develop active transportation plans and sometimes active transportation policies as well. So finally, at the local level, these are the main entities that help to shape policy, programs, and projects related to walking, biking, and the built environment. Note that what we discuss on this slide, besides Mark, deals specifically with KCMO. So the mayor and city council enact policies, programs, and projects that impact the transportation system here in Kansas City, Missouri. They are also in charge of determining the annual city budget, which includes opportunities to allocate funding directly to bicycle, pedestrian, accessibility, and transit endeavors. The city council is made up of the mayor and 2 council members from each of the 6 council districts. Mark, so the Kansas City region has its own Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. An MPO is the policy board of an organization created and designated to carry out the metropolitan transportation planning process. For our region, that organization is the Mid-America Regional Council. In this capacity, Mark works to convene various stakeholders from across the region around issues related to transportation, conducts surveys and open houses on regional planning efforts, provides regional resources such as maps, and works to distribute much of the federal funds that are allocated for transportation, usually in the form of project grants acquired through a competitive process. Some of the key committees within MARC include the MARC Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Total Transportation Policy Committee. Finally, there are a number of boards, commissions, and committees that serve to advise the city of Kansas City, Missouri on important issues, including those related to transportation. The vast majority of these are filled with appointees from the general public and supported by city staff. While they cannot vote up or down on something in the same way the council can, their stated support or opposition for a project, plan, or policy can sometimes inform how members of the council eventually vote. Key groups in this realm include the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Parking Transportation Commission, and the City Plan Commission. I'd also like to spend some time discussing the staff who play a role in making the transportation element of a community function as well. So the city manager or administrator is the leader among a city's staff, and as such oversees a lot of the day-to-day functions on that side. Perhaps the best way to explain the role they play in relation to the mayor and city council for KCMO is like a business. The city council is the board of directors, with the mayor as the board chairman. The city manager, by contrast, is the CEO. So when a new policy or plan is adopted by a community, it falls to one or more departments within that community to carry it out. This can get a bit confusing, especially when it comes to transportation policies or plans in Kansas City, Missouri. That is because depending on what the project is, there may need to be coordination from the planning department, public works department, parks and recreation department, and even the water department, to name a few. So within these departments, there are staff, and it helps to know about the staff, the departments which deal most frequently with your policies or plans for 2 key reasons. First, it's helpful to know at least enough about a department to know who to ask if you have a question about something. But second, understanding the staff makeup can tell you what opportunities or challenges they may face with implementing a policy or plan. Examples of key staff members in KCMO would include our Public Works Director, as well as the city's Transportation Director. So with that understanding of what the structure of government looks like when you're fighting for these policies, we can now shift a little bit more to major issues and have a quick look at advocacy work on each level. So going back to the top, let's begin with the feds. So the infrastructure bill is a major piece of legislation that includes a lot for active transportation, but we can understand it better by putting the major pieces into one of 2 categories: policy and funding. In terms of policy, the infrastructure bill goes much further than previous legislation on prioritizing the needs of people who walk or bike. There's a much stronger push for communities, MPOs, and states to adopt complete streets policies, for example. This is important to know because it informs the funding element. In order to access the new funding opportunities the bill creates, communities have to demonstrate through project and plan requests that they are doing more to prioritize the needs of people who walk, roll, and bike. The National Roadway Safety Strategy is the first policy of its kind in that it is a stated goal of helping the U.S. to eventually reach 0 traffic deaths. Though very ambitious, this is an important milestone for pedestrian and bike advocates because those users have been making up a larger portion of traffic deaths in recent years. The strategy will also inform some of the Department of Transportation's spending decisions for the next few years as well. And finally, for those who may be unaware, the Build Back Better legislation was supposed to follow the infrastructure bill, but ultimately failed to earn enough support in the Senate to be brought up for a vote. I still want to include it here because there is a chance that it could be advanced, albeit in smaller, separate pieces. This legislation would matter for bike-ped transportation because it could include legislation to specifically address aspects of equity as well as sustainability. Next, let's go back to the states. So in Missouri, the big legislative issue for walking and biking deals specifically with driving. Missouri is one of only 2 states in the country with comprehensive distracted driving legislation without comprehensive distracted driving legislation on the books. And though there is legislation on the books which bans it for people 21 and under, it does nothing about people older than that age. There have been 10 pieces of legislation related to distracted driving introduced in the legislature, which hopefully increases the chances that something will get passed. And I can report today that at least one of those measures has made it out of committee. With statewide active transportation plans, there are opportunities for statewide active transportation plans in both Kansas and Missouri, but they are at very different stages. So Kansas is on the cusp of completing an update to their statewide active transportation plan, something they haven't done in decades. That plan could help to shape active transportation policies and projects immediately. On the other side of the state line, the Show Me State doesn't currently have a statewide active transportation plan. However, advocates are working to change that. So I also wanted to note some of the major issues happening in KCMO this year as well. So with improving walkability, the city of KCMO passed legislation at the end of 2021 to develop a sidewalk prioritization plan. Beyond that, there will be an updated audit on the sidewalk repair program coming out in April of this year. Both speak to a broader desire by council members and staff to find ways to improve walkability in Kansas City. Expect more work on this front throughout 2022. With Vision Zero, the City Council adopted a Vision Zero resolution calling traffic violence a public health crisis and setting a goal of ending traffic violence by 2030. In addition to an immediate set of projects for the first 2 years, a Vision Zero task force has also been working to develop a long-term action plan to guide efforts as well. A draft of that plan is expected later this summer and will need to be adopted by the full council. And finally, 2 major planning documents should be finalized either sometime this year or early next year: the KC Spirit Playbook and the update to the Climate Protection and Resiliency Plan. Both documents will include important language on multimodal transportation and will help to inform policy decisions going forward. The Climate Protection Plan will likely be completed first, but both plans will need to be formally adopted by the City Council before implementation can really begin. On that first note about improving walkability, there will be a key opportunity to learn more about how the city is spending GO bond funding for sidewalk repair, but also to speak up on which corridors and areas the city should focus those funds for the year. There will be several meetings listed on this page for the public to weigh in. All of the meetings here will happen virtually, and those meetings will be recorded and posted on the city's website. To learn more, check out the sidewalk page on the city's website. We hope to see you at the meeting on the 15th and the meeting on the 26th. So the last big local advocacy opportunity in KCMO I wanted to note for you all involves I-70. So MoDOT is evaluating the area between Paseo and US 40. That highway cuts right through the east side of Kansas City, a deliberate decision to isolate places like the historic Northeast, but also something which has contributed to higher rates of crashes and fatalities for vulnerable road users. All of this before considering the economic losses, displacement, and long-term health and climate impacts. So key goals include improving safety and accessibility. MoDOT is looking to finish an environmental study which will inform potential changes. As part of that study, staff have indicated that two of the key goals for the project are to improve safety and to improve accessibility. So there are a number of crossings over and under the highway, which will also be evaluated as part of this project. These crossings are vital for people without access to a car, so it's critical that advocates speak up for improvements such as better sidewalks and lighting, as well as dedicated maintenance for those facilities, especially after major weather events like snow. MoDOT is currently using an interactive map where people can go to drop in key areas of focus and give specific feedback. Please consider making a comment or several before March 31st. While it may seem daunting, all of those comments and all of those things that people say really do add up. And the more people who speak for those elements, the more likely they are to end up in the final product. So, with all of that being said, I now want to turn to you, the advocate, and talk a little bit more about how you can get involved and advocate for change. All of the work that we do to advocate for changes to the built environment has to keep equity at the forefront. In speaking up for these changes, we have to make sure we use our voices and influence to ensure that the needs of marginalized communities are front and center. There's always more we can do on this front as an organization and as individuals, but here are some key ways to begin that process. Make friends beyond your comfort space. Just because you live in Midtown doesn't mean that Midtown is the only place you can go to learn more and build connections. Advocacy is a team sport, and the bigger and more nuanced your team is, the more effective your messaging will be. Even in a pandemic, virtual meetings like this and outreach are still possible and necessary. Learn more about the subject. There are a number of great resources that can shed light on the intersection between transportation and equity, no pun intended. This includes reports such as the State of Transportation and Equity, as well as Dangerous by Design. It also includes books on different elements of transportation and equity, such as Bicycle Race by Adonia Lugo. Always listen. It is incredibly important to recognize that equity is both a process and an objective. We achieve both when we make it a point to actively listen to the voice of communities that have historically been left out of the conversation, in particular, Black and Brown residents, immigrants and refugees, the unhoused, people living with disabilities, members of the LGBTQIA community, and low-income earners. While we all have a stake in a better transportation system, we can't achieve that unless we listen to and elevate those voices. Connect with electeds. One of the simplest things you can do as an advocate is to connect with your elected officials, especially at the local level. Your council members, and to a lesser extent, the mayor, are much more accessible than state and federal elected officials simply because they have a smaller jurisdiction. As with everything, there are certain things to keep in mind. Understand the issues. Most elected officials have a set of core issues that they really care about. This is typically informed by their personal or professional background, or through the work they've done on council, or a combination of both. In any case, even if one of those core issues aren't your issue, it can still be helpful to know what they care about most. The reason why this matters is because it can help you to craft an argument that speaks to what they care about. Connect with their aides. It is also helpful to connect with the legislator's aides. Aides do a lot of work on behalf of elected officials and are just as important as the official themselves. Treat them with respect. And finally, offer expertise. When you meet with an elected official, it shouldn't always be about making a push for legislation. What can be just as meaningful can be to ask questions and offer insights into the issue you care about. It helps to establish a relationship with the legislator because that can open the door to presenting yourself as an expert or key voice for them to consult on your issue at a later time. Attend meetings. Additionally, while speaking up at City Hall is important, that is not the only place to learn more about issues and to speak up for what you care about. The following are also ways to have an impact on elements of the built environment in your community. Neighborhood associations hold a good amount of sway, especially in decisions about the built environment. Bike Walk KC often collaborates with them because they can be more persuasive than the crazy bike people. Go to a meeting and learn more. If there are vacancies in the association leadership, volunteer to run. Having a network of people advocating for the built environment within and beyond City Hall can make a huge difference. Open houses. Oftentimes, when the city wants to get feedback from the public on a proposed project or plan of some sort, they will host an open house for people to come, learn more, and provide input on what is being discussed. Your attendance can play a big role in many of these instances because they are typically sparse in volume in terms of people who show up. If there is a comment card or an email sign up, take advantage of both. The email sign up will usually include more information on additional meetings and more opportunities for feedback, sometimes in the form of an online survey. And finally, with boards, commissions, and committees, remember that the city has a number of advisory groups composed of citizens tasked with being a resource to the mayor and council on important issues. Attending the meetings of these groups are great, but do a little more research and see if there is a vacancy. If so, learn more about the requirements for serving and consider applying for the position. For the purpose of multimodal transportation issues and the built environment, the main group in KCMO is the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and we do have vacancies. So it's also important to understand that you can't make change happen on your own. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, advocacy is a team sport. What this means is that it takes a group of folks to make change happen. But how do you build an effective coalition? An effective coalition has a common cause which all members understand and are willing to support. This can be in support or opposition of a proposed piece of legislation, pushing for more funding, or something bigger. What's most important here is ensuring that the goal is clear for everyone. An effective coalition must also include people from a set of diverse backgrounds. This isn't just limited to individual elements, but the organizations they represent. For example, when Bike Walk KC advocated for the adoption of the Complete Streets Ordinance in Wyandotte County, we had support from several key organizations, including AARP, the American Heart Association, neighborhood groups, economic development organizations, and the whole person. The reason this matters is because when you speak up, you're able to show the decision makers that many folks, not just the obvious ones, care about a certain issue. And an effective coalition also requires ensuring the coalition remains strong throughout. In my experience, beyond the clear goal, there are two key ways to help ensure this is the case: periodic check-ins and simple, meaningful ask. For the periodic check-ins, people are busy. It helps to occasionally check in from time to time to let people know what's going on with the issue at hand. It's also an opportunity to answer questions and address any concerns that they may have. For the task, it will quickly wear down a group to ask folks to do too much or to do something overly complicated. Not every new development requires a phone call or an hour-long meeting. Instead, make the request meaningful and simple. Something we often do for this is ask partners for letters of support, and we provide a template. The template gives a clear set of directions, and the letter is a meaningful piece of something for legislators to review as they weigh potential legislation. Finally, and most obviously, you can speak up, especially at committee meetings at City Hall. When you're speaking to an elected official or anyone who is in a position to vote or otherwise influence a decision around policy, what do you say? Make it personal. Tell the official a story or share an experience that helps this person to better understand why this is something that matters to you. Are you scared when you walk or ride your bike? Do you know someone who has been injured or killed while doing the same? And if so, how has that affected you? A story is often an effective way to hook the listener and get them to pay more attention to what you're saying. Bring facts. A good way to build upon that story is to tie it into the broader truth about the circumstances you hope to change. So the story is powerful, but it is made even stronger by a demonstrable fact that there is something concrete that could be done to prevent it in the future. Be respectful. It is natural in advocacy work to be passionate, and you have to be. If you don't care about an issue, why should anyone else? However, while it is important to share that passion with the official in question, that passion must be tempered by respect. More specifically, you should never curse, threaten, or insult your audience or your opponents. One big reason for this is that it takes time and attention away from the point you're trying to make. And more importantly, for many officials, this is the quickest way to make them shut down and stop listening. Finally, never, ever end your contact with an official without making a deliberate, specific ask. Going back to the previous, you always want to make sure that you say specifically what you want, whether it be passing a tenant bill of rights, adopting a complete streets ordinance, or simply pushing to make a sidewalk safer for someone to walk upon. So as Liz mentioned at the top of this meeting, we're going to have a number of other advocacy trainings throughout the year. AT 102 covers public speaking and how to prepare for public meetings. AT 103 will cover how to build an effective coalition in greater detail. And our final one, AT 104, will discuss how to work effectively with staff and elected officials. So with that, I want to thank you all. And it seems like we have a lot of stuff in the chat. So I will stop sharing and we can start getting to those questions.
Thank you, Michael. Rebecca commented that this is really good insight, and I think we can all agree. I think I learned something every time I come to one of these, even though this is not my first. So folks asked some questions when they registered. So while our attendees are thinking about what they've learned so far tonight and coming up with questions a little more spontaneously, I'm going to go ahead and ask the questions that they offered in their registration. And it turns out that we have a lot of like-minded individuals that signed up for this class or this training. So I am going to share the questions kind of in themes. So if you're here tonight and you submitted a question, you may not hear your exact question, but it is very likely that somebody asked something very similar. So I'm going to ask about topics rather than specifics for the most part. With the exception of Ellen. Hi, Ellen. It's good to have you on. Hi. Ellen asked, are there any resources available to build coalitions with my neighbors?
Let's see. Let me see. Well, Ellen is here, so I would want a little bit more clarification if she can give it in the chat. But in terms of wanting to build more coalition with your neighbors, I think it really is just kind of hitting the sidewalk and just trying to connect with them a little bit more. Oftentimes people kind of have to be asked, and you can still do so in a socially distanced manner, even with the pandemic. And so I think it just involves specifically talking to your neighbors about some of the issues that you care about and learning more about how those issues are affecting them as well.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
I think that, I know in Kansas City, Missouri, we have the Center for Neighborhoods, right, with UMKC. Are there other similar organizations in other cities in the metro that might help, that kind of support neighborhood associations or anything like that? But no, I guess this could be a question for anybody, not just Michael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm trying to think. I think outside of Kansas City, I think most of the time a good resource to potentially connect with. Yeah, Wyandotte County has livable neighborhoods, and that is a pretty similar organization. But the one thing I'll note with livable neighborhoods in Wyandotte is that is specifically with the specific neighborhood groups that are registered with the city. So if it's a smaller group than that, it may not be involved in that group. So that's just, it's still a very good group, but that's just one thing to you want to keep in mind. So. Right. And thank you very much for sharing that in the chat as well. Rebecca has said Johnson County does have some policies to support the formation of neighborhood groups. one thing I would just say is, even within Johnson County, you want to make sure you're looking at community by community. And one other group you might want to consider out that way are chambers of commerce, especially in Johnson County. Groups like the Overland Park Chamber, the Olathe Chamber will also be a good way to potentially connect with other people who want to see things happen in your community as well. Yes, and thank you, Eric. Eric has also mentioned Northland neighborhoods. So not just for Northland KC-Mo, but also for suburban communities in Clay and Platte County. So very, very good question. And thank you everyone for the crowdsourcing of responses and insights.
I'm going to share or shout out to a few local, more grassroots bike advocacy groups or active living advocacy groups. So there's the KC for Safe Streets. There is also I Bike Lenexa, and you can find both of those on social media. And then we have a few members here tonight who are from Parents Advocating for Safe Streets.
Yes.
And Michael's one of those members, right?
Yeah. Yes. So yes. So Ellen is here. I think Christian is here. So and it is a regional group. It is not just limited to KC-Mo. So they're doing a lot of good work, and they are always happy to welcome new folks. So if that is something that interests you, please feel free to follow up with Ellen or Christian in the chat.
And I would like to say that you don't have to be a parent. I'm not a parent, but I've got a couple of nieces and I like to hang out with them. So I'm part of the group too, even though they're not my babies. All right. So next here's one of our theme questions. So Josh, Stephen, and Klaus all asked a similar kind of question. Is it more effective to advocate locally, like grassroots style, or can we make bigger change on a state or federal level?
I would absolutely say it is probably an easier lift to do the advocacy at the local level, especially for issues around walking and biking. It is the people, your mayor and city council members, who are making the immediate decisions on whether that sidewalk is getting built or whether that bike lane is getting installed. And so I would absolutely say focus your attention on those issues. You should still stay abreast and connected with state and federal groups or legislators if you can. But in terms of just bandwidth and ability to really make change and focus in on getting something immediate, local level is definitely where it's at.
Awesome, thank you. Next, we have a question from Beth, Allison, and Leah. It's like all you guys just like have you're on the same page, having the same ideas. So what is the best way to keep track of city council? And with the caveat, please don't make us read the agenda every day.
So it's the unfortunate thing is that it varies from place to place. So I'll say in KC-Mo, if you don't want to follow having to read through the committee agendas every time, you need to connect with the agencies or organizations that are advocating for those issues. So Bike Walk KC, like part of my job is to read those things that that you don't want to read up on the agendas and everything, because that's what the job is. And we can send you, we oftentimes send out advocacy alerts when there's something coming up where something did get kind of flagged by the policy team that needs you to speak up on. In other communities, it varies. So some places are very transparent and you can just sign up for emails the same way that is, and other places it's very opaque. It just kind of depends. If a general rule of thumb is if you don't want to have to sit through everything, really work on building a rapport with people on council or staff in the departments that work on the issues you care about, so that they can tell you, hey, this issue is coming up. You'll definitely want to speak up about this. So,
I think that's part of the making friends, right? Is
yes.
that when we make friends, then we can kind of share the burden and we don't all have to dig through the same
Yes.
website from the 90s every single time.
Right. So, and thank you for dropping the mailing list link in there too. So,
one other thing, I know that my council district has a newsletter that they send out, and that can be really helpful too. And that's another way to get to know your council person, because they will share the things that they're really, really passionate about. And so that's another way that you can get to know them a little bit better. Yep. So upcoming opportunities to get involved. You shared some of those. And I would like to, if I may, talk about the decriminalization guide that we just released this week. Because this is something that we were able to achieve in Kansas City, Missouri, but there are other communities in our region that are ripe for the picking.
Yes, and so in terms of upcoming events with that, we did publish this guide to kind of document our efforts in KCMO. We will be having a webinar to talk about this on April 20th, and obviously everyone here is welcome to join us for that. But yes, that's definitely something else that we are continuing to work on, and we're eager to work with advocates in other communities to try to get that done.
So to give a quick explanation of what that was, Kansas City, Missouri in May of 2021 struck jaywalking laws from the lists or from their city ordinances. So jaywalking is no longer a crime in Kansas City, Missouri, and that's really important because Kansas City, just like many, many other communities in the nation, discovered through like hard data that the enforcement of jaywalking laws was really racialized. And so like 65% of jaywalking tickets were written to Black people, when it's only like 30% of the population in Kansas City, Missouri. So it was really racialized, obviously enforced in a way that was targeting people of color. And so, but it's not illegal anymore, which is great for Kansas City, Missouri. But we partnered with the national organization Safe Routes Partnership to write this guide on how other communities can take what we learned, our challenges and our successes, and how they can apply it in their own communities, because we would love for this to be across the country. Yeah, so that's something that you can take and go forward in your own communities. And this is kind of also, this is the season for advocacy and for public meetings, isn't it, Michael?
Yes, it is. So there's also a KCMO budget. Well, actually the KCMO budget hearings have concluded. So the main thing to do at this point is, if you haven't already, send an email to your council member and say very explicitly that you want walking or biking to be a priority in the budget. And the more people who do that, the more we can ensure that things like ADA sidewalk improvements, zero fare transit, complete streets, and Vision Zero continue to get funded for the year. So if you haven't already sent that email to your council members, do it immediately.
I think also there is the, in Kansas City, Missouri, there's the grants, the Rebuild KC grants. The deadline on those moved to March 22nd. And so if your neighborhood or your community group was considering applying for one of the Rebuild KC grants, and that's federal money, right?
That's, I think they're using ARPA funds to give out some improvement opportunities to improve. And I know that we've already had a couple of members and partners who have asked for letters of support for that as well. So
yeah, so let us know if you need support for that, because we would be eager to help you guys rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. And that's in addition to the PIAC funds.
Yes.
Right. And I just posted the link in the chat.
Thank you, Amy. Yes.
I just wanted to say one thing about the decriminalization, the how-to guide. You know, Michael is one of the lead author, co-author with Safe Routes Partnership, but I think there needs to be sort of a byline that says, and to all the advocates in Kansas City and all of our members and donors who helped with this, because that end result is really the culmination of you all and folks like you working with us, because we can't do this work by ourselves. And if any of you have advocated for issues that are important to you, it can be lonely work sometimes. So I'm really excited about this guide, because this is really meant to start conversations in other communities much smaller than ours, where maybe it's just a couple of people who are just fighting with all of their heart and soul to get some of these issues addressed. And so take as much pride in this guide as we are, because I think it's going to be a really important tool for advocates across the country. So I just want to say thank you to everybody.
Thanks, Amy. I also put the link in the chat for kind of the backstory of Kansas City, Missouri's decriminalizing process, because we have a list of the organizations that helped us form this coalition. We couldn't list all of the individuals. We didn't want to put people's first and last names down, but I know that you'll recognize a lot of those names on there as folks who are not necessarily directly associated with biking and walking advocacy, but because all of these issues are connected, it mattered to all of us, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Michael, we are just about to run out of time. And we've got some more ideas and opportunities popping up in the chat, so keep an eye on that. But I would like to share, if I may. Mm-hmm. I'm going to share my screen. So I put the link to joining our mailing list in the chat. You can also join by texting. You can text Bike Walk KC to 52886, and that will put you on our advocacy email list. Our advocacy emails are different than our regular newsletters. They have much more in-depth stuff, and they'll have a little bit more explanation. And we also add a good bit of planning into our advocacy emails, because planning is a big part of that infrastructure and built environment and that advocacy process that we talk so much about. Speaking of planning, on April 6th, our community planner, Teresa, is hosting a panel of 3 local community planners. So it's Travis Pendleton, Sarah Copeland, and Jenna Fernandez are all going to be on this panel talking about what is community planning and what makes your favorite places truly special. This is going to be on April 6th at noon, and we're going to record this one also. So if you are not able to attend it in person, I think it'll still be a really great program to watch in the future, especially for folks who are interested in local community advocacy, because this will help kind of explain the role of a planner and the profession of planning and how it works to improve our communities and make the places we live places that we really love to live. So join us for that. We can also put this link in the chat, and I'll send it out in the email tomorrow as well. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are a member-supported nonprofit, and our work is funded by folks like you, by Bike Walk KC members. If you're not yet a member, I invite you to invest in the work that we do together. We are all redefining our streets as places for people, and I am so honored to do that with you guys. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you for your commitment to a safer, more connected Kansas City Metro. And I think that's all we've got. Thank you, everyone. Good night.